The bitter wind bit through layers of clothing as snow began to swirl across the darkened Boston streets. Jackson Riley noticed her immediately, a slender figure huddled at the bus stop, scrubs barely visible beneath her thin jacket. He hesitated only a moment before pulling his weathered Honda to the curb. "Need a ride?" he called through the passenger window. The woman, Taylor, studied him with exhausted eyes before nodding gratefully. Her delicate hands, chapped from hospital sanitizer, clutched a worn bag as she slid into his warm car. No one could have guessed that this simple act of kindness would transform both their broken worlds forever. One man who lost everything but kept his heart open. One woman who gained everything but lost herself in the process. Watch until the end to discover how a single moment of kindness can bridge different worlds and heal wounds that money and status could never touch. The morning light filtered through worn curtains as Jackson Riley moved quietly through his small apartment kitchen. At 38, the lines around his eyes told stories of both laughter and grief. His movements were practiced and efficient as he whisked pancake batter while simultaneously checking his 12-year-old daughter Maddie's math homework propped against the fruit bowl. The familiar rhythm of their morning routine, a carefully orchestrated dance of parenting, working, and surviving, had become both his comfort and his prison. "Dad, Cooper lost his permission slip again," Maddie announced, already dressed in her carefully chosen outfit, her long brown hair pulled back in a slightly crooked ponytail that Jackson had attempted to fashion after watching a tutorial video the night before. Jackson sighed, setting down the spatula. "Bottom drawer of my desk in the shop. I made copies after the field trip fiasco last month." The pride in Maddie's eyes at his foresight made his chest tighten. She was growing up too fast, shouldering responsibilities no 12-year-old should bear. The small two-bedroom apartment above Riley's auto repair wasn't much, but Jackson had transformed it into a home after selling their family house 4 years ago. The medical bills from Ashley's cancer treatments had nearly bankrupted them, despite their insurance. The cruel irony wasn't lost on him. They'd done everything right, saved carefully, planned meticulously, yet one diagnosis had unraveled their entire life. "Cooper, pancakes are getting cold, buddy," Jackson called toward the small bedroom his children shared. His 8-year-old son appeared, hair sticking up at impossible angles, eyes still heavy with sleep and perhaps the remnants of the nightmares that still plagued him. The boy had been just 4 when his mother died, young enough that Jackson sometimes worried her face was fading from his memory. Each morning, as they ate breakfast together, Jackson would study his children's faces, looking for traces of Ashley. Maddie had her mother's determined chin and analytical mind. Cooper inherited her artistic talent and gentle spirit. Sometimes the resemblance hit Jackson with such force that he'd need to excuse himself, stepping into the small bathroom to compose himself before returning with a manufactured smile. Riley's Auto Repair had a reputation in the neighborhood for honesty and fair prices. In an era of chain repair shops and dealership service centers, Jackson's small business was a throwback to when a handshake meant something. The concrete floor was spotless, tools organized with military precision, habits formed during his days as a Navy mechanic before meeting Ashley and settling down. "The timing belt needs replacing, Mrs. Wilson, but I can patch it for now if money's tight this month," Jackson would say, knowing the retired teacher lived on a fixed income. The grateful smile he received was worth more than the profit he sacrificed. He'd learned long ago that there were different kinds of currency in this world. On Wednesday afternoons, Jackson taught basic auto maintenance to students from the local high school. Behind the shop's office desk, surrounded by invoices and parts catalogs, sat Ashley's framed nursing school graduation photo. During quiet moments when the shop was empty, Jackson sometimes found himself talking to her, updating her on the kids' progress, or asking her impossible questions about parenting that he now had to answer alone. At night, after tucking the children into bed and checking homework, Jackson often found himself on the couch, a cold beer in hand, flipping through channels without really watching anything. The master bedroom remained largely untouched, Ashley's dresser still holding her folded sweaters, her perfume bottle, gathering dust on the vanity. He slept on the pull-out couch most nights, telling himself it was to be closer if Cooper had nightmares, but knowing it was his own ghosts he was avoiding. Despite encouragement from friends to get back out there, Jackson couldn't imagine dating again. It wasn't just loyalty to Ashley's memory that held him back, but a bone-deep fear of loss. He'd watch couples walking together in the park while his children played, feeling a hollow ache in his chest, not just missing Ashley, but missing the person he'd been when she was alive. While Jackson Riley built his life around permanence and responsibility, Taylor Bennett constructed hers around achievement and reinvention. As the 36-year-old CEO of Pinnacle Healthcare System, she presided over board meetings in tailored suits that cost more than Jackson's monthly rent, her Harvard MBA and meteoric career trajectory making her a fixture in business magazine's 40 Under 40 lists. Her corner office, on the 32nd floor of a downtown Boston high-rise, offered panoramic views of the city she'd conquered professionally, while remaining a stranger to personally. The sleek, minimalist furniture reflected the aesthetic of her luxury apartment, impressive, expensive, and utterly devoid of the comfortable clutter that transforms spaces into homes. The board expects a 5% reduction in operating costs across all 12 facilities this quarter, her CFO reminded her during their morning briefing. Taylor nodded, studying the spreadsheets with practiced efficiency, trying to ignore the growing hollowness that accompanied each cost-cutting measure. What none of her executive team knew was that Taylor had begun a secret project 3 weeks earlier. Disturbed by growing complaints about patient care and staff burnout, she'd created an undercover program to experience her hospitals firsthand. Using her nursing degree, the path she'd abandoned after her parents' death, she'd been working shifts at different facilities under the alias Taylor Miller. Her parents had been brilliant physicians, their lives dedicated to patient care, until a rainy night and a drunk driver had stolen them both during her final year of medical school. Grief-stricken and suddenly alone in the world, Taylor had made a pivotal choice, abandoning medicine for an MBA, believing she could honor their legacy by fixing the broken healthcare system from the top down. That idealism had gradually eroded under the relentless pressure of quarterly earnings reports and shareholder expectations. The executive who stared back from her bathroom mirror each morning, with perfectly highlighted hair and carefully applied makeup that concealed any hint of vulnerability, sometimes felt like a stranger wearing her face. That fateful evening, she'd just completed a 12-hour shift at Lakeside Medical Center, her body aching in ways her premium gym membership had never prepared her for. A patient, an elderly man with no family, had gripped her hand before being wheeled to surgery, thanking Nurse Miller for her kindness. The genuine gratitude in his roomy eyes had pierced something long dormant in Taylor's heart. When the weathered Honda pulled to the curb and the tired-looking man offered her a ride, every self-protection instinct screamed caution, but something in his eyes, kindness without agenda, made her accept. As she settled into the passenger seat, she noticed the family photo on his dashboard, the man with 2 smiling children and an empty space where someone else should have been. "I'm Jackson," he said simply, turning up the heat. "You look frozen through. Hospital shift?" "Yes," she answered, the half-truth coming easily. "I'm Taylor. I'm new to the area." Another partial truth: she'd lived in Boston for 15 years but had never really inhabited the city beyond her carefully curated spaces. "Kid's mom was a nurse," he offered, eyes fixed on the increasingly treacherous road. "Toughest job there is, if you ask me." When he asked where to drop her, Taylor gave the address of a modest apartment building several blocks from her luxury high-rises. As she prepared to step back into the swirling snow, Jackson handed her a slightly worn business card. "Riley's Auto Repair," he said with a small smile. "In case you've got car trouble sometime, I'm there most days." 3 days later, Taylor found herself pulling into the small lot beside Riley's Auto Repair, her luxury sedan deliberately suffering from a minor issue she'd created herself. The rational part of her brain, the Harvard-educated CEO, recognized the absurdity of seeking out a stranger because of a momentary connection. Yet here she was, walking into the clean but modest garage where Jackson Riley was bent over the engine of an ancient Buick. While Jackson examined her car, his son Cooper abandoned his sorting project and approached shyly. "Are you a doctor?" he asked, eyeing her with curious 8-year-old solemnity. "A nurse," she corrected, the lie becoming more comfortable with repetition. My mom was a nurse, Cooper said matter-of-factly. She's in heaven now. Dad says she helps angels feel better when they get hurt. The simple statement caught Taylor off guard. That's a beautiful way to think about it, she managed, something tightening in her chest. Following Cooper into the small office, Taylor found herself in a space that perfectly reflected its owner. Everything was organized but well-worn, the desk with its careful stack of invoices, the ancient coffee maker, the children's artwork taped to the walls. A girl about 12 sat at the desk, textbooks spread around her. "This is Maddie," Cooper announced. "She's supposed to be at Lily's house, but she has a project." Maddie looked up, assessing Taylor with eyes too old for her young face. "Dad gave you a ride during the snowstorm," she stated rather than asked. "He said you were freezing at the bus stop." "It was very kind," Taylor replied, sensing this child required honesty rather than condescension. The conversation that followed was unlike any Taylor had experienced in years. Maddie asked thoughtful questions about patient care, hospital hierarchies, and what made a good healthcare provider. Taylor found herself answering from the heart, rather than reciting corporate platitudes, rediscovering beliefs about medicine she'd long buried beneath quarterly reports and efficiency metrics. As she prepared to leave, Jackson mentioned a community potluck at the local church that weekend. "Neighborhood thing. Good food, good people. You mentioned being new to the area, so—" He trailed off, clearly surprising himself with the invitation. "It sounds nice," Taylor heard herself say, ignoring the charity gala already on her calendar. "What should I bring?" The weekend potluck marked the beginning of what Taylor would later recognize as her double life. To the corporate world, she remained the polished, efficient CEO of Pinnacle Healthcare. But increasingly, her free time found her in Jackson Riley's orbit, at his garage, at community events, and eventually in his home. She watched, fascinated, as Jackson moved through the crowd, remembering details about everyone's lives. Mr. Collins's grandchildren, Mrs. Wilson's garden, the Fletcher twins' college applications. When an elderly woman approached with a trembling gait, Jackson immediately found her a chair, bringing her a plate of food without being asked. Throughout the evening, Taylor found herself helping Maddie serve food to homeless attendees invited from the local shelter. When a young boy fell and scraped his knee, she instinctively knelt to examine it, efficiently cleaning and bandaging the wound with supplies from the church's first aid kit. Later, during an impromptu game of charades, Taylor found herself laughing, truly laughing, for the first time in months. The sound surprised her so much she nearly stopped, catching Jackson watching her with an expression that made her heart skip in a way both frightening and exhilarating. Their next significant encounter came during an unexpected snowstorm that closed schools but not Jackson's garage. She received his desperate call on her private line as she prepared for a board meeting. "I hate to ask," he began, his voice tight with stress, "but there's a school closure, and I have this Porsche engine rebuild I can't reschedule, and the regular sitter has the flu." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Taylor interrupted, already mentally composing an email postponing the meeting she'd spent weeks preparing for. The day that followed tested every adaptive skill Taylor possessed. Cooper was easy, content to draw at the kitchen table and tell her elaborate stories about his imaginary friends. Maddie, however, regarded her with skepticism, clearly wondering why her father had entrusted them to someone he barely knew. When Cooper mentioned missing his mother during a quiet moment, Taylor found herself sharing the story of losing her own parents, simplified but honest, and watched understanding dawn in his young eyes. "So you don't have a mom or dad either?" he asked. "No, but I have good memories of them," she replied, her throat tight. "Just like you have good memories of your mom." When Jackson returned, exhausted but triumphant from completing the difficult repair, he found them in the kitchen making a magnificent mess of chocolate chip cookies. Flour dusted every surface, including Taylor's cheek, which he instinctively reached to brush away before catching himself. "We're making cookies for the angels," Cooper announced importantly. "Taylor said maybe my mom and her parents could share them in heaven." Jackson's eyes met Taylor's over his son's head, a look of such raw gratitude that she had to turn away, suddenly overwhelmed by the intimacy of being allowed into this family's grief and healing. Their paths crossed again unexpectedly at a public park where Pinnacle Healthcare was sponsoring a charity health fair. Taylor was volunteering in her nurse capacity, her CEO identity safely tucked away at the office. When she spotted Jackson and his children at the automotive club's booth, demonstrating basic car maintenance, her first instinct was to avoid them. Her two worlds colliding felt dangerous somehow. But Cooper spotted her first, racing over with the unself-conscious enthusiasm of childhood. "Taylor, Dad, look who's here," he called, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward their booth. As the children dispersed to various activities, Taylor and Jackson found themselves walking side by side along the park path, watching as Maddie helped Cooper navigate the climbing structure. "I'll talk about you," Jackson said quietly. "Both of them do, actually. That's rare." As they walked, their conversation deepened unexpectedly. Taylor found herself sharing her frustrations about healthcare, speaking as a nurse, but thinking as a CEO, about the pressures facing hospitals, the corporatization of medicine, the impossible balance of quality care and financial viability. Jackson listened intently before sharing his own experience with the healthcare system during Ashley's illness. "The nurses were angels," he said, "but the system itself? Sometimes it felt like we were fighting insurance companies more than cancer." The irony that they were discussing her own healthcare network without him knowing struck Taylor forcefully. What would he think if he knew she was partly responsible for the very system he was criticizing? As spring turned Boston's trees vibrant green, Jackson and Taylor's friendship deepened through small, meaningful encounters. For Jackson, Taylor represented an unexpected second chance at connection. For Taylor, Jackson and his children offered a glimpse into an authentic life she'd sacrificed for career advancement. Until the day the carefully constructed walls between Taylor's worlds came crashing down. Jackson was reviewing his monthly bills when the registered letter arrived. The property management company informed him that the entire block had been sold to Pinnacle Healthcare System for development into a medical complex and parking structure. All businesses had 6 months to vacate. Maddie found him still sitting at the desk an hour later, staring at the letter. Taking the letter, she read it with furrowed brows, before opening his laptop and searching for information about Pinnacle Healthcare. "Look," she said suddenly, turning the screen toward him. "There's an article about the expansion, and that's—" Her voice trailed off as Jackson stared at the photograph accompanying the Boston Business Journal article. Taylor Bennett, CEO of Pinnacle Healthcare System, stood confidently in a boardroom, announcing the acquisition of property for expansion. The caption praised her business acumen and vision for healthcare consolidation. The face was unmistakable, the woman he'd been growing to care for deeply, whose gentle presence had begun healing wounds he thought permanent. Except, she wasn't Taylor Miller, struggling nurse. She was Taylor Bennett, corporate executive, whose company was destroying his livelihood. When she appeared at the shop unannounced that afternoon, Jackson knew immediately that something was wrong. His expression must have revealed everything because she stopped short, her usual warm smile fading. "You know," she said simply. "Was any of it real?" he demanded, his voice raw with hurt. "Or was I just research for your next corporate takeover? Get to know the little people before you destroy their lives." Maddie appeared in the office doorway, her young face hardened with the weariness of a child who'd already experienced too much loss. "You lied to us," she accused. "You pretended to be our friend." "It wasn't like that," Taylor insisted, her corporate poise evaporating. "When we met, I was already doing the nurse shadowing program, trying to understand what was happening in our hospitals. Meeting you, it wasn't planned." "But you knew about this," Jackson gestured to the eviction notice on his desk. "And you said nothing." "I've been fighting the board on the expansion plan," she explained desperately. "That's why I came today, to tell you that I've proposed an alternative that preserves existing businesses. But they're resistant, and People like you see people like us as numbers on a spreadsheet," Jackson interrupted, the bitterness in his voice foreign even to his own ears. "We're just collateral damage in your 5-year growth strategy." Cooper appeared then, confused by the tension. Why is everyone mad at Taylor? The little boy's innocent question hung in the air between them. Maddie took her brother's hand protectively, leading him back into the garage with a last betrayed look at Taylor. "I think you should go," Jackson said finally. "Whatever this was between us, it can't be built on lies." The next morning, Taylor walked into the Pinnacle Healthcare executive boardroom a different person. Gone was the accommodating corporate officer who prioritized shareholders above all else. In her place stood a woman reconnecting with principles long buried under ambition. "This expansion plan is fundamentally flawed," she began, interrupting the CFO's presentation. "It destroys small businesses that serve the community, creates a parking structure in a neighborhood that needs affordable housing, and contradicts our mission statement about community wellness. I've prepared an alternative proposal," she continued, distributing folders. "We repurpose the abandoned Brooks manufacturing building 3 blocks away, already zoned for commercial use, larger footprint, better access to public transportation, and no displacement of existing businesses." "That property would cost 20% more," the CFO objected. "And yield 30% better long-term community outcomes," Taylor countered, "which is supposed to be our primary concern as a nonprofit healthcare network." The chairman leaned forward. "Taylor, you've never opposed expansion before. In fact, you've championed our growth strategy for years. What's changed?" "I've remembered why I wanted to work in healthcare," she said simply. "And it wasn't to build parking garages." "The board has already approved this acquisition," the chairman reminded her coldly. "If you can't support the company's direction, perhaps we should discuss your position." Taylor looked around the table at colleagues she'd worked alongside for years yet barely knew. "Perhaps we should," she agreed, removing her executive badge and placing it on the glossy table. "Because I can't be part of decisions that harm the very communities we claim to serve." 2 weeks after the confrontation at the garage, Boston experienced an unseasonable late spring snowstorm. Jackson had just closed the shop when Cooper began wheezing, a familiar and terrifying sound that signaled an asthma attack. The inhaler provided only minimal relief, as the boy's breathing became increasingly labored. "We'll drive," Jackson decided, bundling his pale son into the car. "Lakeside Medical Center is closest." When he finally reached the front of the line, the registration clerk eyed their insurance card with a frown. "This plan requires pre-authorization for emergency services at out-of-network facilities." "My son can't breathe," Jackson said incredulously. "He needs treatment now." "No, it doesn't," came a firm voice from behind them. Jackson turned to find Taylor, dressed in scrubs, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, approaching the desk. "Pinnacle Healthcare implemented a new pediatric emergency protocol last week. All children receive immediate care regardless of insurance status, with authorization obtained concurrently." To Jackson's astonishment, the woman immediately complied, calling for a nurse to escort Cooper to an examination room. Taylor disappeared after ensuring Cooper was receiving care, leaving Jackson and Maddie huddled together in the small treatment room as the medical team stabilized the boy's condition. "Mr. Riley," a nurse appeared when Cooper had finally fallen asleep. "That nurse who intervened earlier? That was Taylor Bennett, the former CEO of Pinnacle Healthcare. She resigned last week, implemented that new pediatric care policy as her final act. The rumor is she's returning to medicine, finishing her residency requirements to become a doctor." "She left us a note," Maddie said quietly, holding out a folded piece of paper. Jackson unfolded the paper with unsteady hands. In neat handwriting were just a few lines. "Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right even when you're terrified. Cooper will be fine. I made sure of it. Take care of each other." When Cooper was discharged the following morning, Jackson drove downtown to the Pinnacle Healthcare headquarters. The security guard at the desk eyed his worn jeans and work boots skeptically. "I need to see Taylor Bennett," Jackson stated, suddenly aware of how impossible this quest might be. "Ms. Bennett no longer works here," the guard replied. Jackson Riley, a young woman in a tailored suit, approached the desk. "I'm Taylor's former assistant. She left instructions that if you ever came looking for her, you should be given access." Taylor was inside, placing framed certificates into a cardboard box, her back to the door. "Taylor," he said softly. She turned, surprise and something like hope flickering across her face. "Jackson, how's Cooper?" "He's good, thanks to you." He stepped into the office. "The nurse told us what you did, both yesterday and last week with the new policy. It was long overdue," she shrugged. "Children shouldn't suffer because of administrative red tape. They also told me you resigned as CEO." Jackson moved closer. "Because of the expansion project?" "Because of a lot of things," she admitted. "Meeting you and the kids. It reminded me of what matters, real connections, making a difference in individual lives, not just systems." "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" Jackson asked. "At first it was just part of the nurse program. Then when we started becoming friends, I was afraid you'd see me differently. Afraid the real me wasn't enough without the title and power." She gestured around the luxurious office. "And I was right, wasn't I? When you found out, you wanted nothing to do with me." "That wasn't because of who you are," Jackson corrected. "It was because you didn't trust me with the truth. And because I thought your company was destroying my business without you saying a word." "I've been fighting that decision since before I met you," she said earnestly. "The board finally approved my alternative proposal yesterday, my last act as CEO. Your shop and the other businesses are safe. You gave up your career for this?" "I gave up a career that was making me miserable for one that might make me whole again," she corrected. "I'm going back to medicine, finishing my residency requirements." "I was afraid," Jackson admitted quietly. "Not just of being hurt by you, but of feeling anything at all. After Ashley died, I built walls to keep everyone except the kids at a distance." "And now?" Taylor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now I'm still afraid," he acknowledged, "but I'm more afraid of not trying." 6 months later, the sign above Riley's Auto Repair gleamed with fresh paint. Inside the renovated office, Maddie was explaining the cardiovascular system to Cooper, using a model Taylor had borrowed from the hospital. "Dr. Bennett said I could shadow her next month for my science project," Maddie told her father as he entered. "Did she now?" Jackson replied with a knowing look. "I'm sure that has nothing to do with the fact that she adores you." The bell above the door jingled, and Taylor entered, still wearing scrubs beneath her coat, dark circles under her eyes testifying to the grueling schedule of a medical resident. Yet her smile as she took in the three of them contained nothing but joy. "Sorry I'm late," she said, setting down bags of takeout. "Mr. Collins came into the ER with chest pain. Turned out to be indigestion, thankfully, but he insisted on telling me the entire history of his digestive system before I could discharge him." "Elle does that with car problems too," Jackson commiserated, crossing to her and placing a gentle kiss on her forehead. "How was your day otherwise, Dr. Bennett?" "Exhausting, exhilarating, exactly where I'm supposed to be," she replied, returning his kiss before being ambushed by Cooper's enthusiastic hug. Together, they'd established a vocational training program that combined basic automotive skills with healthcare education, teaching young people from underserved communities both practical trades and emergency medical response. 1 year after their first meeting, Jackson led Taylor outside where he'd installed a surprise in their new home's garden, a bus stop bench, restored and painted, with a small plaque reading, "Where the journey began. For when we're old and want to remember," he explained, his arms encircling her waist. "I love it," she whispered, turning in his embrace to face him. "All of this, the kids, the community program, returning to medicine, it's more than I ever dreamed possible." "We've both lost and found," Jackson said thoughtfully. "Maybe that's what makes this so precious. We know exactly what we have to be grateful for. The journey that matters most isn't measured in miles or millions, but in the courage it takes to let someone in when all you've known is loss. In finding home not in places or possessions, but in the eyes of those who truly see you. Across bus stops and boardrooms, through snowstorms and sunny days, in sickness and in perfect, improbable health. True love doesn't see status or wealth. It sees the courage to be vulnerable again after being broken. It finds us in unexpected moments, when we choose kindness without expecting anything in return. If this story made you believe that goodness and love still exist in this world, show your support and share it with someone who needs to believe too.